The galaxy had a habit of breaking its most stubborn warriors first, and the Verin Imperium had been breaking them for 300 years. High Chancellor Dorian Thresh stood at the observation deck of the orbital station circling Aris Prime, watching supply freighters drift between the skeletal remains of defense platforms that had once protected the capital world. His silver carapace, marking him as one of the Eureles, a species renowned for diplomatic finesse and strategic calculation, gleamed under the harsh station lights. Behind him, the Grand Assembly argued with the desperation of the drowning. "We cannot sustain another offensive," rasped Councillor Dravax, his reptilian Kharan frame coiled tight with barely contained frustration. 12 worlds lost in as many months. Our fleets limp home with half their numbers. This is not war, this is execution. "Then what do you propose?" challenged Ambassador Yelta, her four crystalline eyes reflecting the tactical displays floating throughout the chamber. "Surrender. The Verin do not accept terms. They conquer or they annihilate." Thresh turned from the viewport, his mandibles clicking softly, a gesture his colleagues had learned meant he was choosing his words carefully. "There remains one option we have not explored." The chamber fell silent. Dravax's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. "The humans. They are untested children playing with fusion drives," Yelta said, her bioluminescent skin pulsing amber with skepticism. "What could they possibly?" "They are adaptive," Thresh interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "In 40 cycles, they have progressed from chemical rockets to faster-than-light travel. Their first contact protocols involved transmitting mathematics and music simultaneously. They are unpredictable, creative, and most importantly, they are neutral. The Verin have not yet turned their attention to Sol, which means they have no stake in our survival," Dravax countered. Thresh's mandibles spread slightly, the Eureles equivalent of a smile, "which means they have everything to gain from ensuring the Verin Imperium does not grow large enough to notice them." The vote passed by a narrow margin. 3 days later, a diplomatic vessel dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, broadcasting friendship and desperation in equal measure. The United Nations Assembly Hall had seen its share of historic moments, but the arrival of actual aliens had a way of making centuries of human achievement feel like a footnote. Secretary General Victoria Cross stood at the podium, acutely aware that every camera on the planet was recording this moment. High Chancellor Thresh addressed the assembly with the aid of a translation matrix that converted his clicking mandibles into measured English. "Your species stands at a crossroads. You can watch from the safety of your system as the Verin consume world after world, edging ever closer to your borders. Or you can join us now, while victory remains possible." Thresh activated a holographic display. Images of burning worlds filled the chamber, cities reduced to slag, orbital habitats torn apart like tissue paper, refugee fleets stretching across star systems. The Verin themselves appeared on screen, massive, chitinous creatures with 4 arms and bioluminescent scarring that marked their kill counts. They looked like evolution's answer to the question, what if nightmares could pilot starships? "The Verin do not negotiate," Thresh continued. "They do not coexist. 6 species have been rendered extinct in living memory. 14 more survive only as enslaved labor forces. If they are not stopped, humanity will eventually face them alone, and by then there will be no allies left to stand beside you." The assembly erupted into argument. Cross let them rage for precisely 90 seconds before calling for order. "Chancellor Thresh, humanity has barely begun to explore our local cluster. Our largest warship carries a crew of 300. What exactly do you expect us to contribute?" Thresh's mandibles clicked in what the translation matrix interpreted as amusement. "Secretary General, we have studied your species extensively since establishing contact. You have been broadcasting your nature to the cosmos for over a century." A new series of images appeared, human history in all its brutal glory. Ancient battles, world wars, scientific achievements born from military necessity, the same species that created poetry and painted masterpieces, also perfecting the art of organized destruction. "You wage war with a creativity that terrifies us," Thresh said quietly. "You turn every tool into a weapon and every obstacle into an opportunity. The Verin are powerful, yes, but they are predictable. They have conquered through superior numbers and overwhelming force for millennia. They have never faced an opponent who treats warfare as an art form. The voting took 3 days. The decision was announced at dawn. Humanity would join the alliance. Admiral Jackson Cole stood on the bridge of the Valiant, humanity's first true warship, and tried not to let his anxiety show. At 53, Cole had served in 3 different navies before the space program recruited him. He'd fought pirates off Somalia, commanded carrier groups in the Pacific, and somehow ended up leading humanity's first combat fleet into a war that had been raging since before his grandfather was born. Fleet status, he asked, his voice carrying the gravel of too many years and too much coffee. Commander Lisa Park looked at her tactical display. All vessels reporting ready, Admiral. 16 destroyers, 8 cruisers and us. Not much compared to what's out there. Quality over quantity, Cole replied, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it. The Alliance fleet was waiting for them at the rally point. The Valiant emerged from hyperspace into organized chaos. Alliance vessels from a dozen species clustered in loose formations, their varied designs reflecting different evolutionary paths and engineering philosophies. Some looked like organic growths, others like crystalline sculptures. All of them bore the scars of long service, hull breaches sealed with mismatched plating, weapon emplacements jury-rigged and reinforced, shield generators that flickered with overuse. Admiral Keithran, a grizzled Dranari whose reptilian features bore the marks of a dozen close calls, hailed them immediately. Admiral Cole, welcome to the Ashra system. I hope your confidence is justified. The Verin don't grant second chances to disappointments. Cole studied the tactical overlay. The Ashra system housed a critical refueling station, and intelligence suggested the Verin would move to capture it within the week. Admiral Keithran, we're ready to do our part. What's the operational plan? Keithran transmitted the battle strategy. It was straightforward to the point of being blunt. Alliance forces would engage the Verin fleet while ground troops secured the station. Standard attrition warfare, the kind that had been slowly bleeding the Alliance dry. Cole frowned at the data. Admiral, their formation has a gap in the lower quadrant. If we... That gap is a trap, Keithran interrupted, his tone weary. The Verin use it to funnel attackers into kill zones. We've lost 3 task forces trying to exploit it. What if we don't take the bait? Cole pulled up tactical simulations, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Look, if we send unmanned drones through the gap, they'll reposition to spring the trap. That's when we hit them from above with everything we've got. They'll be caught between repositioning and our main assault. Silence stretched across the communication channel. Finally, Keithran's mandibles clicked. Laughter. Park's translation software helpfully noted. Admiral Cole, you've been part of this war for less than a week, and you're already suggesting tactics we haven't considered in 3 centuries. Is that a yes or a no? It's a let's see if human creativity is as dangerous as Chancellor Thresh claims. The Verin fleet arrived precisely on time, because the Verin did everything precisely on time. Their vessels moved in perfect geometric formations, dark and angular, like knives cutting through space. Commander Zolrath, leading the assault force, felt the familiar anticipation of another easy victory. The alliance was broken, scattered, desperate. This would be routine. Then the drones appeared. 20 unmanned craft streaked through the gap in the Verin formation, their transponders broadcasting false life signs. Zolrath's tactical officer reported multiple enemy contacts, and following doctrine, he ordered the fleet to pivot and execute the standard ambush formation. They'd done this hundreds of times. That's when the sky above them turned to fire. Human railguns didn't rely on energy weapons or plasma cannons. They simply accelerated tungsten projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed and let physics handle the rest. When the Valiant and her escorts opened fire, the Verin shields, designed to disperse energy weapons, discovered they were trying to stop kinetic impactors traveling at 70,000 kilometers per second. 3 Verin cruisers disintegrated in the opening salvo. The rest of the fleet, caught mid-maneuver, scrambled to adjust. But Cole wasn't done. Human missiles, guided by AI systems that made split-second adjustments, wove through Verin point defense like dancers. Human fighters, smaller and faster than anything the Alliance flew, darted between capital ships with pilots who trained on combat simulators since childhood. All ships execute Pattern Chaos 3, Cole ordered, and the human fleet abandoned the rigid formations that every other species considered standard. The Valiant rolled, spun, and dove, her escorts matching each movement with practiced precision. They fought like a school of fish rather than a military formation. Individual units making independent decisions, but moving with collective purpose. Zolrath watched his tactical display with growing horror as his forces were systematically dismantled. The humans fought without pattern, without predictability. One moment they massed fire on a single target, the next they scattered in 6 directions. They sacrificed drones without hesitation, but protected their cruise ships with ferocious tenacity. They broke every rule of engagement he'd learned in 2 centuries of conquest. All units retreat, he ordered, the words tasting like ash. Retreat to rally Point Sigma. But the humans had anticipated that too. Commander Park had positioned a wolf pack of destroyers along the most likely escape vector. The Verin found themselves running straight into another ambush, and by the time they managed to jump to hyperspace, they'd lost half their fleet. The Alliance forces, witnessing the engagement from their positions, sat in stunned silence. Keithran finally found his voice. Admiral Cole, what in the name of the founders was that? Cole allowed himself a tight smile. That, Admiral, was humanity saying hello. News of the Ashra system victory spread through the Alliance like wildfire through dry grass. Suddenly, every species wanted to know more about these newcomers who'd accomplished in one battle what the Alliance had failed to do in decades, make the Verin retreat. Chancellor Thresh convened an emergency session of the Grand Assembly. The chamber crackled with an energy that had been absent for years, something that looked almost like hope. They are reckless, Dravax protested, though his earlier skepticism had notably softened. Their tactics violate every principle of coordinated fleet action. Their tactics work, countered Ambassador Yelta. Perhaps it's our principles that need examination. Thresh watched the tactical recordings for the dozenth time. The humans fought like no species he'd ever encountered. They were aggressive, innovative, and utterly unpredictable. More than that, they seemed to enjoy the challenge. While Alliance crews fought with grim determination, the human communications were filled with jokes, competitive banter, and what the translation matrix could only interpret as trash talk. We need to understand them better, Thresh decided. I'm attaching Alliance advisors to the human fleet. We learn their methods, adapt what we can, and coordinate our efforts. The Verin have held the advantage for too long because we've been fighting their war. It's time we changed the rules. Captain Rachel Ward stood in the hangar bay of the Valiant, watching as a mixed team of Alliance personnel filed aboard. She'd been briefed on the integration program, though privately she thought it was going to be a disaster. The Alliance fought by the book, and humanity had never bothered to read the manual. A Karan warrior named Sethix approached, his scales scarred from countless battles. Captain Ward, I am to serve as tactical advisor for your squadron. Ward extended a hand, noted Sethix's confusion, then clasped his folklore instead. Welcome aboard. Fair warning, we do things a bit differently than you're probably used to. I have noticed, Sethix replied dryly, his translator adding a note of sardonic amusement. Your pilots flew through debris fields that would have destroyed most craft. Either you are extremely skilled or extremely suicidal. Little of both, Ward admitted with a grin. Come on, I'll show you why. She led him to the briefing room where her squadron, pilots Matchstick, Dancer, Preacher, and half a dozen others, were reviewing mission footage. They'd painted nose art on their fighters, personalized their flight suits, and somehow managed to fill the room with enough personality to overwhelm most sensory organs. Listen up, people, Ward announced. We've got Alliance advisors joining us. Sethix here is going to be riding along on training ops, learning our methods. Play nice. Matchstick, a wiry pilot with burn scars down one arm, waved from his seat. So, Sethix, what's your kill count? The translator took a moment to process the casual tone applied to such a serious question. I have eliminated 43 enemy vessels over my career. The pilots exchanged impressed looks. Preacher, the squadron's oldest member, nodded respectfully. That's solid work. How long you been flying? 32 standard years. Damn, Ward's got 23 kills in 6 months. Sethix's head swiveled to stare at Ward, who shrugged uncomfortably. Different tactics, different war. Plus, I've got the best squadron in the fleet backing me up. Over the following weeks, Sethix learned that Ward's humility was genuine and entirely misplaced. The human pilots flew with a combination of skill and insanity that defied explanation. They practiced maneuvers in asteroid fields, used gravitational slingshots to achieve impossible vectors, and treated their fighters like extensions of their own bodies. More than that, they trusted each other with absolute certainty. Matchstick would fly blind through a debris cloud because Dancer said the path was clear, and that was enough. How do you train this level of coordination? Sethix asked after a particularly harrowing simulation. Ward considered the question. We don't, not really. We train skills, how to fly, how to shoot, how to think in 3 dimensions, but trust, that's built in the spaces between. In the jokes, the shared meals, the stupid bets about who can thread a tighter turn. We're not just a military unit, we're a pack, a tribe, a family. We fight together because we live together. Sethix filed his reports back to Alliance Command, and they made for fascinating reading. The humans, he noted, treated warfare as a puzzle to be solved rather than a ritual to be executed. They questioned everything, improved constantly, and approached each engagement as if it were their first. While Alliance forces grew weary and predictable, human forces grew sharper and more dangerous. The Verin were adapting too. Commander Zolrath had been demoted after Ashra, replaced by Supreme Commander Voris, a tactical genius who'd crushed 17 rebellions without losing a single engagement. Voris studied the human patterns obsessively, looking for the weakness that every species possessed. She found it in their aggression. Humans pushed forward constantly, always attacking, always pressing. They lacked the patience for defensive warfare, the discipline to hold position and wait. Voris designed her trap accordingly. The Nexian system held the Alliance's primary shipyards. If it fell, the war effort would collapse. Voris committed her forces to the assault, but she positioned her reserve fleet 3 hyperspace jumps away, ready to respond when the humans inevitably overextended themselves trying to break her siege. Admiral Cole studied the tactical situation with growing unease. They want us to attack. Of course they do, Park agreed. The question is whether we can afford not to. If those shipyards fall, the Alliance loses its ability to replace losses. Cole pulled up star charts, running scenarios through his head. The straightforward approach was to hit the Verin siege force hard and fast, exactly what Voris expected. But what if they didn't? How fast can we fabricate transponder beacons? He asked suddenly. Park blinked. A few hours, maybe. Why? Because we're going to teach the Verin that humans learned a long time ago. The best way to win a fight is to not be where the enemy expects you to be. Voris watched with satisfaction as the human fleet emerged from hyperspace and immediately began their characteristic aggressive assault. Her siege force engaged, trading fire and slowly falling back, all according to plan. The moment the humans were fully committed, she'd bring in her reserves and crush them against the shipyard defenses. Then her sensor officer made a confused sound. Commander, we're detecting multiple human fleet signatures. They're everywhere. Voris checked her displays. Human transponders lit up across the system, above the orbital plane, below it, scattered among the asteroid belt. It was impossible. The humans didn't have enough ships for that kind of deployment. Those are decoys, she realized with dawning horror. Find the real fleet. But which signatures were real? The Verin fleet split their attention, dividing their forces to cover multiple threat vectors. That's when the actual human fleet, running silent and cold, emerged from behind the system's gas giant and slammed into the Verin rear echelon. Cole's plan was elegant in its simplicity: make the enemy sea ghosts, force them to divide their strength, then hit them where they were weakest. The shipyard defenses, no longer under siege, joined the assault. Caught between two forces and unable to identify which enemy contacts were real, the Verin fleet crumbled. Voris called for her reserves, but Cole had anticipated that too. Alliance forces, finally learning to think like their human counterparts, had positioned themselves along the most likely jump points. When the Verin reinforcements arrived, they found themselves walking into prepared ambushes. The Battle of Nexus lasted 18 hours and ended with the complete rout of Verin forces. Voris survived by abandoning half her fleet, and the loss was catastrophic, not just militarily, but psychologically. The Verin Imperium had built its reputation on inevitable victory. Now, for the first time in living memory, they were losing. The Verin response was predictable in its brutality. If they couldn't defeat the Alliance militarily, they'd make the cost of resistance unbearable. Strike forces began targeting civilian populations, refugee convoys, and medical facilities. The message was clear. Surrender or watch your species burn. Chancellor Thresh received the reports with cold fury. They're trying to break our will. It might work, Dravax admitted quietly. Some member species are already calling for peace negotiations. They're willing to accept subjugation if it means survival. Thresh turned to Admiral Cole, who'd been called to the emergency session. Admiral, I need your honest assessment. Can we win this war? Cole didn't hesitate. Yes, but not by playing defense. The Verin are betting that you'll fracture under pressure, that your unity is weaker than their resolve. Prove them wrong. Give me a fleet and permission to take the fight to their territory, and I'll show them what happens when you threaten a human's friends. The assembled representatives erupted in argument. Attacking Verin territory directly was madness. It would escalate the conflict beyond any hope of peace. It would cost countless lives. It would. It would work, interrupted Sethix, the Karan warrior who'd embedded with Ward's squadron. He limped into the chamber, still recovering from injuries sustained in the Nexus battle. I have fought alongside humans for months now. I have seen how they think, how they plan, how they refuse to accept that any obstacle cannot be overcome. They do not fight to survive, they fight to win. Perhaps it's time we remembered how to do the same. The vote was closer than Thresh would have liked, but it passed. Cole would get his fleet and his chance to prove that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their absolute refusal to accept defeat. The target was Vis Prime, the Verin Imperium's administrative capital. Not their homeworld, that remained hidden somewhere deep in their territory, but the bureaucratic heart of their empire. Billions of Verin civilians lived there, along with the command infrastructure that coordinated their military operations. Cole assembled the largest combined fleet in Alliance history. Human vessels formed the strike force, but Alliance ships provided support, logistics, and most importantly, expertise. Sethix and dozens of other Alliance officers had embedded themselves so completely with human operations that they thought like humans now, creative, aggressive, and slightly unhinged. The fleet jumped into the Vis system and found it defended by orbital platforms, minefields, and a guard fleet 3 times their size. It should have been suicide. Cole opened a communication channel that broadcast to every Verin receiver in the system. This is Admiral Jackson Cole of the Terran Fleet, speaking on behalf of the Alliance. You have 1 hour to evacuate your civilian population to the planet's surface and withdraw your military forces to minimum safe distance. After that, we're coming through, and anyone in our way becomes a casualty statistic. The Verin commander, believing humans were bluffing, refused. 59 minutes later, he learned that humans don't bluff. They just give their enemies one last chance to be smart. The assault was a masterpiece of controlled violence. Human engineers had spent months developing specialized munitions for this exact scenario. Kinetic kill vehicles that could punch through station shielding, electronic warfare packages that turned Verin automated defenses against each other, and breaching pods that delivered boarding parties directly into critical infrastructure. The Verin fought with desperate ferocity, but they were defending fixed positions against an opponent that excelled at fluid, unpredictable warfare. Within 6 hours, Cole's forces had secured the orbital infrastructure, and positioned themselves directly above the capital city. Broadcast this, Cole ordered, and his communication officer opened channels to every receiver on the planet. People of the Verin Imperium, I want you to understand something. We could destroy your city from orbit. We could turn your capital into a crater and barely deplete our ammunition stores. But we're not going to do that, because that's what you would do, and we're not you. He paused, letting the translation software catch up. Here's what's going to happen instead. Your military command will surrender unconditionally. Your armed forces will stand down across all fronts. Your government will enter negotiations with the Alliance to establish permanent peace terms. If you refuse, we won't bombard your cities. We'll just park here, blocking trade and travel, until your economy collapses and your people demand new leadership. Your choice, but you've got 12 hours to decide. The Verin leadership convened in emergency session, and for the first time in their history, they faced an opponent who'd outmaneuvered them so completely that their only options were surrender or slow starvation. The vote wasn't even close. The war ended not with a spectacular battle, but with a signing ceremony aboard the Valiant. Thresh and the Alliance leadership, Cole and human representatives, and Verin diplomats whose mandibles clicked with barely suppressed rage, all gathered to formalize what everyone now understood. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted. This treaty recognizes the sovereignty of all Alliance member species, Thresh announced, his voice carrying across communication channels to billions of beings. It establishes mutual trade agreements, restricts military expansion, and creates neutral zones where former enemies can learn to become neighbors. Most importantly, it acknowledges that might does not make right, and that diversity is strength. The Verin representative signed the documents with visible reluctance. Their empire would survive, but greatly reduced, their military curtailed, their expansionist dreams ended. It was a bitter defeat, made worse by the knowledge that they'd been outthought rather than outgunned. Cole watched the ceremony with mixed feelings. They'd won, but the cost had been steep. Thousands of humans dead, alliance losses in the millions, entire worlds scarred by warfare. The victory felt hollow in some ways, necessary in others. Ward found him later in the observation deck, staring out at the assembled fleets. "You okay, boss?" "I'm thinking about what happens next," Cole admitted. "We came into this war as the unknown quantity. Now we're the species that broke the Verin Imperium in less than a year. How long before someone decides we're the threat that needs containing?" Ward considered that. "Then we make sure they never have a reason to think that way. We stay the species that fights for their friends, that honors their commitments, that pulls people up instead of pushing them down. We be better than the Verin, not by conquest, but by choice." Cole smiled slightly. "When did you get so philosophical? Been hanging around Chancellor Thresh too much. Guy's got a mandible for every occasion." She paused, then added more seriously, "We changed the game, Admiral. Not just by winning battles, but by showing everyone that there's a better way to be strong. That's worth protecting." 6 months after the treaty signing, Admiral Cole stood on the observation deck of a new space station being constructed at the former border between Alliance and Verin territory. The station would serve as a joint facility, part trading post, part cultural exchange, part reminder that yesterday's enemies could become tomorrow's partners if everyone worked hard enough at it. Chancellor Thresh joined him, the Ureli's leader having become something close to a friend over the long months of war and its aftermath. "Second thoughts, Admiral." "Always," Cole admitted, "but also second chances." The Verin weren't evil, they were strong and became convinced that strength justified everything else. We just had to remind them that being powerful and being right aren't the same thing. "A lesson many species struggle to learn," Thresh observed. His mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "I've been composing my official history of the war. I wanted to ask, what made humans so effective? We had the numbers, the experience, the resources. What did you bring that we lacked?" Cole thought about the question carefully. "Perspective, maybe. We've been on both sides, conquered and conqueror, victim and aggressor. We've built empires and watched them fall. We've committed atrocities and fought to prevent them. Every human carries the weight of that history, that knowledge that we're capable of both tremendous good and terrible evil. It makes us creative because we have to be, adaptable because we've survived everything from ice ages to nuclear weapons by learning to change. He gestured to the station under construction. But more than that, I think we brought hope. Not the passive kind that wishes for better things, but the active kind that builds them. You asked us to join your war, and we said yes. Not because we wanted to fight, but because the alternative was watching good people suffer and doing nothing. Sometimes the most human thing you can do is stand up for someone else. Thresh's mandibles spread in what Cole had learned was genuine pleasure. There is a saying among my people. The tree that bends in the storm survives to grow again, while the rigid tree breaks. I think humans understand this instinctively. We've got a saying too, Cole replied with a slight smile. The nail that sticks up gets hammered down, but the nail that bends becomes a hook, something useful, something that connects things together. Maybe that's what we're meant to be, not the strongest or the smartest, but the ones who figure out how to make things work when they shouldn't. The two leaders stood in comfortable silence, watching as construction crews from a dozen species worked together on the station. Former enemies sharing tools and techniques, learning each other's languages, slowly building something that hadn't existed before, trust. Somewhere in the galaxy, new challenges waited. But for now, there was peace, hard-won and honestly earned. And in a universe that often felt cold and hostile, that was worth celebrating. Cole raised a glass, real whiskey from Earth, a gift from home, in a silent toast, to victories that cost everything but meant something, to allies who became friends, to a galaxy that learned to bend instead of break, and to the stubborn, creative, impossible humans who'd shown everyone that sometimes the best way to win a war was to teach everyone involved how to stop fighting.